Once upon a time in a small African village named Lango, there lived a woman called Lela. In Lango, a woman's beauty was judged by how small her waist was. The slimmer, the more attractive she seemed to the men. When Lela was a child, she was just like any other girl, but as she grew older, she developed a strong love for food and could eat large amounts without ever feeling full. No matter how much food was served to her, Lela always finished it. It wasn't long before she became the heaviest woman in the entire village of Lango. As she gained more weight, all the men stopped paying attention to her, and no one asked her out. One by one, her female friends got married, leaving Lela still living with her parents, growing older each day. Her father, Mr. Kato, was very concerned that his daughter might never find a husband. All of Lela's younger sisters had already married and were living happily, but Lela remained single. This weighed heavily on Mr. Kato's mind. One day, Mr. Kato heard that his friend's son, a young man named Madhu, had returned to the village after spending many years in the city. Madhu was looking for a wife, and Mr. Kato saw this as a great opportunity. He quickly told his friend about his daughter, Lela. A date was arranged for Madhu to come and meet her. When Lela heard the news, she was thrilled. Could this finally be her chance to get married like her friends and sisters? The night before Madhu's visit, Lela spent hours getting ready, dressing in her best clothes, hoping to impress him. The next day, Madhu arrived at Lela's family home. But as soon as he saw her, disappointment filled his face. He had imagined marrying someone slimmer, not someone like Lela. "I can't marry someone this big," Madhu said rudely, staring at her body in disgust. Without saying anything more, he turned and left. Lela was devastated. All the excitement and joy she had felt disappeared in an instant. She locked herself in her room and cried for days, feeling like no man would ever want to marry her. "I'll always be alone," she kept telling herself. After days of crying, Lela decided she couldn't go on like this. There had to be a solution. She remembered the village legend of the river goddess, known to grant wishes. Determined, Lela left her house and walked to the river. Once there, she called out, "Great river goddess, please help me, I am in desperate need." Suddenly, the river started to ripple, and a beautiful woman with glowing blue skin emerged. It was the river goddess herself. "What is it that you wish for, young one?" the goddess asked kindly. Lela, with tears in her eyes, pleaded, "Please, great goddess, make me slim and beautiful like the other women. All the men reject me because of my size. I want to be married and loved like my friends." The river goddess looked at her with compassion and said, "You are already beautiful, my dear. You must learn to love yourself, no matter what others think, but I will help you. Before the next market day, you will meet a man who will love and cherish you, just the way you are. This, I promise." Lela thought deeply about the goddess's words, realizing the importance of self-love, and that her worth was not defined by her appearance. The promise of finally finding a husband had once excited Lela, but now, it was not enough. Her heart was hardened with anger and bitterness. "I want all the men in this village who humiliated and rejected me to suffer," she began. "I want them to pay for the pain they've caused me with their cruel words and disgusted looks." The river goddess was silent for a moment, then simply said, "It is done. Your wish is granted." The next morning, chaos broke out in the village of Lango. All the men woke up to a shocking discovery: their manhoods had mysteriously disappeared overnight. No one could explain why. Terrified, they rushed to the village juju priest, known for his great mystical powers, hoping for answers. After consulting his oracle, the priest gave the men a shocking truth. "It is Lela, the woman you have mocked and rejected for so long, who has taken your manhoods as revenge for the way you treated her," the priest declared. "The only way to restore what you've lost is for each of you to sleep with her. Until then, you will remain incomplete men." A heavy silence fell over the crowd of men as they realized what the priest's words meant. If they wanted to be made whole again, they would have to sleep with the woman they had always scorned. It was a hard blow to their pride, but they had no choice. One by one, they lined up outside Lela's home, waiting for their turn. To everyone's surprise, once inside her house, Lela suddenly became irresistible to the men. The moment they entered her room, they were overwhelmed with desire for her. Hours upon hours were spent in her presence, and the men felt strong and full of energy while with her. Yet whenever they tried to be with their wives or any other women, they felt weak and powerless. Lela had a strange hold over them. For Lela, this was sweet revenge. She had always dreamed of being desired by all the men in the village, and now it was happening. She had gone from being the most rejected woman to the most sought-after one. Meanwhile, the men's wives were devastated. No matter what they did to lure their husbands back, nothing worked. Even threats of leaving did not break the spell Lela had cast on them. Finally, after weeks of suffering, the wives decided to go to the juju priest for help. "We beg you, please find a way to free our husbands from Lela's control and restore their manhood," they pleaded. "Our homes and families are falling apart." The juju priest took pity on them and consulted his oracle once more. After a long moment, he finally spoke. "There is a way. Take this special powder. It holds ancient magic. Spread it around Lela's house while she sleeps, then recite this counter-curse phrase I will teach you. This will break her spell, and your husbands will be free, their manhood and desire for you restored." The wives clutched the powder as if it were a priceless treasure and quickly memorized the chant. That night, while the men were with Lela once again, the wives snuck into her home under the cover of darkness. Carefully, they sprinkled the powder around the house, making sure not to wake anyone. Inside, Lela lay fast asleep on a mat, surrounded by the sleeping bodies of the village men. The wives quietly chanted the counter-curse 3 times, just as the priest had instructed. At first, nothing happened. But soon, the men began to stir. They awoke as if coming out of a trance, blinking in confusion. Their eyes widened as they realized they were free of Lela's spell. The men, realizing where they were and what they had been doing, were filled with shame. "Forgive me, my wife, I didn't mean to stray, some dark force was controlling me," they cried, rushing back into their wives' arms. The spell had indeed been broken, and soon word spread across the village that the curse had been lifted, and Lela's hold over the men was destroyed. Husbands and wives were happily reunited. As for Lela, she woke up the next morning feeling disoriented and confused, with no memory of what had happened the night before. She called out for the men who had so eagerly satisfied her desires just the day before, but there was no response. All the men had returned to their wives, and none of them would even look in Lela's direction, now that her spell was gone. Realizing the curse she had cast on the men had been broken, Lela knew she had to find answers. There was only one person she could turn to, the river goddess. Without wasting any time, Lela ran through the village and headed straight to the riverbank. Once there, she called out desperately, "Great river goddess, please come, I need your help." But no matter how much Lela cried out, the river goddess did not appear. She sat by the river, shouting for what felt like hours, but there was only silence. Lela couldn't understand why the river goddess had abandoned her. Was it because she had used the magic for revenge instead of the original wish to find a husband? As the days turned into weeks, Lela was forced to accept a painful truth: the river goddess would never appear to her again. Her heart heavy with disappointment, Lela returned to the village, realizing that her desire for revenge had cost her everything. She had been so focused on making the men pay for their mistreatment of her that she missed the chance for the loving marriage the river goddess had initially promised. For the rest of her life, Lela remained the loneliest woman in the village. Her story became a lesson about the dangers of anger, greed, and obsession with society's standards of beauty. While Lela had been hurt for years because of her body, seeking revenge brought her no true happiness or peace. The moral of Lela's story teaches us that holding on to bitterness and using it to harm others will only lead to more pain. In the end, the only way to find true contentment is by guarding your heart and seeking kindness and forgiveness. And so, the story of Lela ends, a reminder of the importance of love and acceptance over vengeance. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you in the next story.